Hello and welcome to a very special Lithops seed sowing episode of Aridzine. Today I'm going to share with you everything that you could possibly want to know about growing these fantastic split rock succulents from seed. Growing any plant from seed is always satisfying. But for these guys, there are so many different colours and cultivars and varieties that there's also an amazing financial incentive because you can develop quite a spectacular collection without having to spend hundreds of dollars. Now, it's not always easy, I should know. I've killed my fair share of Lithops seedlings over my years, but if you follow the steps that I'm going to outline for you today, it'll bring your chances of success up quite considerably, I hope. And you'll also have a bit of fun along the way. So let's get stuck right in to how to grow Lithops straight out of seed. So let's gather all the things that we're going to need now to have success in this seed sowing venture. The first thing you're going to need is a pot. Any old plastic pot is fine. This is a 7 centimetre by 7 centimetre pot, and I'll be sowing maybe about 50 seeds into that. The seeds are like dust, which we'll talk about shortly. You're going to need a folded piece of paper. Why? It's going to help with seed distribution, and again I'll show you that in a minute. A tray or a dish full of water. It's going to make bottom watering, soaking the soil in the pots far more easy. You're going to need a scoop. You're going to need soil mix, and I'm going to explain precisely the importance of the components of your soil mix in just a second. Absolute key to success. And then, and I'll expound upon this in a little bit more detail shortly as well, but you're going to need a top dressing, and in this case I'm using decomposed granite. You don't need to, but like I said, I'll explain the importance of this stuff too in just a moment. Once you've got all that together, you're ready to start your seed sowing process. Now, it's autumn here in Sydney, which is a fantastic time of year for sowing Lithops seeds. Springtime is too if you're in the northern hemisphere. Those shoulder seasons just provide perfect temperatures for Lithops seeds to pop. Now, what I'm going to be doing after I sow my seeds, I'm going to be putting these onto a heat mat over the winter time. As temperatures cool, that'll just keep them going and growing so that they're ready in the springtime to come outside and put on a bit of growth. If you're on the other side of the earth working with different seasons, you might want to keep your Lithops seedlings cooler over the summertime, because what you'll find is they don't like really low lows and they don't like really high highs. That's a period of dormancy. And we're going to try and keep them out of dormancy for at least 12 months or so they can put on a bit of size. But enough about that. Let's talk about soil, because this, and I cannot stress this enough, this is going to be your absolute key to success or potentially failure. Now, when we grow plants from seed, we typically have an instinct or a tendency to want to sow them in a nice, moisture-retentive, organic mix. Certainly what we do when growing vegetables, for example. But Lithops are not vegetables. They grow in some of the most arid parts of the world, high deserts in southern Africa. And so they really will not be happy with moisture-retentive, organic soil. What that means is that you're going to need to either buy or create your own extremely coarse, very mineral soil mix. I'm going to show you what I've got today. So this is my soil mix. It's, as you can see, very coarse, not very high organic component. That's because the organic component is the moisture retentive part of this, and too much moisture is going to kill these seedlings straight off. It's not too big. The pieces of mineral aren't too chunky, but what you're going to find is that this is going to be a great blend for them to get their roots into, but not drown in. This is a mixture 80% inorganic to 20% organic, and the components, I've got 40% pumice, I've got 20% zeolite, I've got 20% decomposed granite, and then 20% store-bought seed growing mix. Now, you don't have to copy that precisely. You're going to need to look at the components, the mineral components that are available to you in your area, and work with what you've got. Coarse sand, as long as it's very coarse, I'm not talking fine dusty stuff, but very coarse sand can be an option. Some people might want to use scoria. Perlite, I'm not that enthusiastic about, But if it's the only thing available to you, that might be what you need to lean on. Whatever the case might be, the key here is coarse, very well draining, very mineral, and with a maximum of 20%, 1/5 of that organic seed raising mix component. Because anything more than that and you're going to end up with rotten plants, dead plants, and you know, it's not going to be a fun process for you at all. Now, while we're talking about minerals, also going to talk about that top dressing. Now, this is even less important than the mineral components of your soil mix, but you are going to need to top dress your seeds with something to retain a little bit of moisture and give them stability. As they pop up, they'll actually be a little bit leggy, and so that top dressing will help stabilize them. Now, this is where you can use something like a very coarse sand. I don't have any of that on hand, that's why I'm using very well sifted decomposed granite, but it's just something that I had. What it is isn't particularly important. Just don't make it very fine. Really fine minerals clog up soil. They actually retain moisture rather than letting it drain. So something really, really coarse and chunky, but not too big, and you'll be fine. So that's our top dressing. Having explained all of that, I reckon we're ready to sow some actual seeds now. Let's do it. So the first step of the process is pretty straightforward. What we're going to do is we're just going to take that beautifully chunky, mostly mineral mix, and we're going to put it into one of our pots, leaving a little bit of a gap at the top, about 1 centimetre is fine. And then what we want to do is we want to moisten this, and the easiest way to do that is just to put it into our tray of water and let it soak up that water from beneath. That won't disturb the soil. It's a great way of watering anything where you don't want to disturb the soil too much. I'll give that a moment to do that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take our seeds and we're going to very lightly sprinkle them across the surface. Now, when it comes to sprinkling lithops seeds, I would very strongly recommend doing this in a place that is not windy, because they're tiny. They're about the size of dust. You can see them here against my thumb for comparison. And the barest gust of wind will just carry everything away. It's also why I recommend using that folded bit of paper, because that's going to make distributing them a lot easier than if you're trying to sprinkle them by hand or something, which really isn't feasible at all. Now, when our soil is nice and moist, just give it a bit of a drain and we're ready to sow some seeds. So now we've soaked our soil, we are ready to sow the seeds. And of course, using our folded piece of paper, which is going to make this a significantly easier job, all we are going to do, give it a little tap to encourage those seeds to move down. And we're going to try and sow them roughly as equally as we can over the surface of that mineral soil mix. If they end up a little bit clumped, not a huge deal. And there we go. Once they're there, the next step is to cover them very lightly. We don't want to bury them too deeply, but we're going to cover them very lightly with a bit of that mineral top dressing. Like I said, you can use coarse sand, you can use other things for this. I'm using decomposed granite, and you can see I'm not completely smothering them, but I am giving them a pretty comprehensive cover up. I'll get rid of some of those bigger chunky bits, fill that in. Now that's pretty much the process. What we want to do, we are going to want to maintain something of a humid environment, so I am going to take that, and for now I'm going to place that into a plastic baggie, which I'm going to seal at the top. And what that's going to do with the moisture in that pot, that will create a humid environment, a very humid microclimate, which is precisely what these plants want to germinate. Now, if all goes to plan, these things should start emerging from that layer of top dressing anywhere between about 4 and 7 days. I have used quite old seeds today, but they do maintain a very long viability, so hopefully they're going to be fine. But in about 7 days at the very latest, I reckon I'll start seeing some of these things, tiny, very tiny little green seedlings start to emerge, pushing up through that top dressing. And from there, the difficult part really starts to begin. Because here's the thing, right? Growing lithops from seed, getting them to germinate isn't the hard bit. That's the easiest step of the process. Keeping them alive and helping them reach maturity like this, that's really where the difficulty lies. So what you're going to do, when they start to germinate, you're not going to take them out of the bag straight away. Ordinarily, I'd leave them in this baggie for maybe 2 to 3 weeks, maybe slightly longer. It's not of huge significance, but you're going to want to take them out of the baggie certainly probably no later than about a month, because after a month there's definitely no more of these things germinating. They come out of the baggie and then we have to start watering them in a fairly precise way. You don't really ever want them to dry out in those early stages of their life, but giving them deep waterings into the pot also isn't ideal, especially watering them with a watering can or anything like that. You'll destabilize the tiny little seedlings, destabilize their roots, and you'll probably kill them. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to get a spray bottle, load it up with water. Let's pretend this one is something I've already prepared. You're just going to give them a good mist, probably at the very beginning every day. But then, as time progresses and the seedlings start to develop a little bit of size, you're going to want to give them a mist maybe every 2 to 3 days. What you'll find is that after a few months, they'll start undergoing what's called their first split, because at the very beginning they have these 2 tiny seedling leaves, but they don't look very much like lithops. They'll undergo a split where their first adult leaves will emerge from within those seedling leaves. You'll keep watering them in that same way through that process, but when those adult leaves have emerged fully, that's when you're going to be able to dial back the watering a little bit. You can still do it like this, and at that point in time I would also start introducing bottom watering maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks to start encouraging deeper root growth, because by that stage the plants are big enough to cope with a little bit of extra moisture, but never too much, and certainly never with a watering can, because that's going to be far too destabilizing for them. Now, it's been about a week since we sowed those lithop seeds. Thought I'd crack open the baggie and give you a little bit of a sneak preview at what's going on inside. And as you can see, we've got some very, very tiny little lithop seedlings starting to poke their way up through that decomposed granite. Of course, this is only the start of that journey. There's a lot to go before we can transform these tiny little specks into fully grown adults, but it's a good start. So I hope that's been useful to you. Growing lithops from seed, like I said, it's a brilliant way of expanding your collection. There are just so many different colours, and you can have a whole rainbow in your collection. They're absolutely special plants and really well worth growing from seed, but they do require special care. So I hope you've learned a little bit about that process today. They seem intimidating at first, but I'll tell you what, I gave it a crack way back when I first started growing succulents from seed. I had no idea what I was doing, and I managed to keep this thing alive all the way to now. So if I can do it, then I'm sure you can too. I hope that's been enjoyable. I hope you learned something, and if you did, please, I implore you, hit like and hit subscribe, and check out the other videos on the channel as well. Until next time, I'm Michael, this is Aridzine. Have a great day growing your lithops from seed and everything else with plants that you love to do. I'll catch you next time.